Fanfiction, tropes, and cliches. Fanfiction, like regular fiction, has its own cliches and tropes. A great amount of them tend to be specific to a particular fandom. As such, I will stick to explaining ones that are commonly found in two major fandoms. Naturally, these will cross over with those found in both normal fiction and other fandoms. But first, what is a trope in regards to fanfiction? What about stereotypes, archetypes, or cliches? Let's start with stereotypes, as that should be one that most already know. The simple definition of a stereotype is a widely held but fixed and oversimplified image or idea of a particular type of person or thing. Stereotypes are seen as particular characteristics or behaviors that are commonly associated with one another. These sets of qualities make it easier to understand certain themes when presented. Yet stereotypes are not literary. They refer primarily to beliefs held about groups in reality, not types of characters. The literary cousin of the stereotype is the trope. Tropes, technically speaking, are stereotypes. Now, if that's the case, why is there a difference? Tropes are defined as devices and conventions that a writer can reasonably rely on as being present in the audience members' minds and expectations. Yet the word stereotype is somewhat stigmatized in society, leading to tropes as being more specific to storytelling. Tropes are things that show repeatedly in media as cultural norms in storytelling, such as types of characters, settings, plot lines, etc. Since tropes are culturally based, this is what sets them apart from archetypes. Archetypes are essentially a very typical example of a certain person or thing, types that fit fundamental human motives. Pretty much the kind of character that pops up in stories all over the place. A trope is a character that puts that archetype in a cultural context. For example, let's say you have a character who is a geek. Now the role of a geek in literature is a trope. Why? Because it's common in a Western cultural context. Broadly, in terms of an archetype, the geek is the scholar, the person who constantly searches for knowledge. Various stereotypes about the geek, like poor social skills, might then be inferred by characters or readers based on their understanding of the society in which they live in. Now, it's incredibly important to mention that none of these things are necessarily cliches. Now, I'm pretty sure most of you watching know exactly what a cliche is, but for the sake of those who are unsure, here it is. A cliche can be defined as a trite or overused expression or idea, often a vivid depiction of an abstraction that relies upon analogy or exaggeration for effect, often drawn from everyday experience, pretty much a person or character whose behavior is predictable or superficial. Now that we have all the definitions out of the way, we can dive into the meatier stuff. In fanfiction, there are a lot of tropes and cliches to look out for. Most tend to be specific to a particular fandom, but naturally there are some things that are common no matter which fandom they belong to. For the purpose of this video, I will go through some tropes and cliches that are usually found in the Naruto and Harry Potter series, as I am familiar enough with both, and that the two fandoms have a large following. Fair warning, there will be spoilers for both series. Let's start off with Harry Potter. The first up is this: a witch or wizard smarter than Hermione. Now personally, I have no problem with one character being smarter than another, so long as it's done right. But the premise here behind this is that Hermione is considered to be the brightest witch of her age. Having a character smarter than her seems a bit far-fetched, but only when the context of the fanfic remains firmly within the series. So long as the fanfic remains well within the boundaries established by the series, then it will inevitably sound far-fetched. But the moment it exceeds those boundaries, then this cliche doesn't quite hold up. Next up is Snape and student love stories. This one is self-explanatory enough. Snape, a teacher, getting into a romantic relationship with a student. This cliche is more of a subsection of another cliche, which is the one of forbidden love. Now, since the majority of Harry Potter takes place within the school, it seems quite easy for an author to conjure up this plotline and run with it. Personally, Snape, buddy, you really ought to keep it in your pants. Next one. Harry has a sister. This cliche is the usual one where the main character has a sibling. For the Harry Potter series, this can be found quite easily. That's not to say it's a bad idea, but it rarely ever is done well. Most tend to follow the same formula, and after the first few it gets quite stale. If an author is to pursue this idea, then I strongly recommend that you flesh out the characters a lot more, since you're adding a character that is not just related to Harry himself, but also his parents, which means that regardless of gender, there will be some that either like or hate them on principle. Fourth on my list is Harry doesn't go to Hogwarts. This is usually corrected, as most authors make Harry go to one school in the beginning, but then make him go to Hogwarts when the Triwizard Tournament begins. So the issues that can happen with this cliche is that the author has expanded beyond the normal scope of Hogwarts. Thus, they have to flesh out the details regarding the other school that Harry went to, and keep in mind that a lot of events would be altered as Harry was never there to be involved with them. Another one is where Harry never goes to Hogwarts at all, but this rarely, if ever, turns out well for the reader. The author has to keep in mind that they must create a whole slew of new characters to replace the originals, and create new events and adventures to keep the reader interested. Number 5 is Snape being an over-the-top bully. Snape hates Harry. It's well established in the series that he treats Harry with disdain. Yet a lot of fanfics out there portray him as an incredibly abusive bully that no one in their right mind would have anywhere near children, let alone teach them. Next up is making Harry a girl. Gender-bending characters is common enough, but majority of fanfics that do this in the Harry Potter series, specifically to Harry himself, tend to do so mostly so they can pair him up, or her, with a male character without it being tagged as male and male pairing. My advice, if you're gonna do this, then do it for the right reasons, and do it the right way. Number 6 is Evil Dumbledore. This cliche sounds ridiculous when taking into consideration that the fanfic is strictly within the confines of the series. But if the fanfic goes beyond the scope and boundaries that are within the series, then it could make sense, but only if presented in a well thought out manner. After all, Dumbledore isn't evil, but rather a person that is out of touch with others, and doesn't quite understand the severity of some of his choices. The road to hell is, after all, paved with good intentions. Lucky number 7 is super helpful goblins. I never quite understood where the idea that the goblins were good came from when the series showed otherwise. Goblins in these fanfics often appear incredibly helpful, often going above and beyond the call of duty to help Harry and friends. Often this requires the goblins to do things that no bank actually does. Gringotts is a bank in the strictest sense, nothing more. Yet many fanfics would write about how they also do property settlements, reading wills, and so on, most of which is usually done by a solicitor or the government themselves. Next is time period errors. The Harry Potter series takes place in the 1990s, thus it would feel very out of place for any of the characters to be having iPads or playing on a PlayStation 4. It's not that hard to stick to the time period, and some errors can easily be forgiven so long as they're insignificant to the story, and don't feel too out of place for the reader. Lastly, our final one for the Harry Potter series is original characters. Original characters, or OC for short, are pretty self-explanatory. Many fanfics have them, but a lot really don't do them well. If you're going to have original characters in your fanfic, do them right, and don't make the new characters overshadow the old without a very good reason. This is part of a bigger issue that will be addressed in its own video. Now onto the Naruto series. The first cliche up is Sasuke's and Itachi's sister. This is where the author creates an original character that is the sister of the last remaining Uchiha brothers. Personally, I have never, ever seen this done well, and the ones I've read have all been terrible. Essentially making the sister a perfect, flawless character that's overpowered beyond anything. If you wish to write a fanfic that has this in it, then I sincerely beg you not to be an idiot and repeat the same mistakes as everyone else. Next up is overpowered characters. This doesn't just apply to original characters, but also to those that are part of the series. Every character has a certain skill set, and each have their own weaknesses. Yet quite a few authors write fanfics where some characters are way too overpowered. The types that can steamroll anyone and anything without a sweat. Third on the list is High School Alternate Universe. Essentially take all the characters of a series and put them in the context of a high school. This is a common enough cliche found across multiple fandoms, and the Naruto fandom is no exception. There are plenty of fanfics that have the Akatsuki in high school and so on. Unless the author knows how to write a good slice of life type of story, then it's doomed to be one of the many generic high school fanfics. Next one is character bashing. Character bashing is when the author writes scenes where a particular character they don't like gets vilified by the other characters to the point where it becomes ridiculous. In Naruto, this often happens to Sasuke and Sakura. It's amusing for sure, and it gets a laugh out of me at the sheer over-the-top way it's done. But honestly, no story that's well thought out would have such things in them. Number 5 is character resurrection. This is when the author writes that a character is dead, only to then immediately bring them back to life. It's incredibly obvious when the character that dies is the main character of the story, unless it's one of those fanfics that explore the ramifications of that character actually dying. Otherwise, it seems quite obvious that the character isn't dead and will reappear at some point later on. My advice is that if you're going to have characters die in your story, then make their deaths actually carry some weight. The next cliche is obvious flashbacks. I don't know which idiot thought it would be a good idea to label flashbacks in their story, but it looks really stupid. Literally putting a sentence that says flashback in between paragraphs to tell the reader that what they're about to read is a past event. It breaks immersion and is completely unnecessary. If you have to write about a past event, then make it a new chapter of its own, or use a simple line break to show a change of scene. It's even worse when some authors write flashbacks within even more flashbacks. Lucky 7 is the Namikaze clan. Plenty of fans correctly guessed that Naruto's father was the 4th Hokage quite a while before its reveal in the series, but that didn't stop some authors from coming up with this ridiculous cliche. The idea that Minato Namikaze, Naruto's father, came from a clan that was super awesome and had an amazing bloodline, as well as great wealth or property, both sometimes. As time went on, this cliche got progressively worse. The information we have on Minato is far from comprehensive, but there's enough to say that he wasn't from a special clan, and he didn't have a bloodline. He was an orphan that eventually rose through the ranks to become Hokage. He was strong, smart, and could kick ass, but for some that simply wasn't enough. Next up is Kushina is a badass. When the series revealed who Naruto's mother was, it didn't elaborate on what her skills were as a ninja. Kushina Uzumaki had a special ability to create chains out of chakra and use them in conjunction with Fuinjutsu, the sealing arts, to great effect. That's all we know regarding her ninja skills. Even when the series came to an end, we still had no more information regarding her combat prowess. And so authors turned her into a near unstoppable badass without flaw. Majority of the fanfics which have this cliche gravitated towards a certain ideal, that Kushina was a swordswoman without peer. Zabuza, Kisame, and the rest of the 7 ninja swordsmen were all a bunch of Neanderthals waving sticks around compared to her. And these authors always gave her a nickname that had something to do with her red hair or her Uzumaki heritage. The Red Death, the Crimson Tide, the Scarlet Whirlpool, the list goes on. It is rare to find a fanfic that has Kushina as a ninja that's amazingly skilled, but realistically so. Our 9th cliché appropriately deals with Kyubi is a friend. Kyubi, who is a 9-tailed fox of Godzilla size, appears in a lot of fanfics that make him into a friendly companion to Naruto, or as a teacher, or even as Naruto's love interest. And there are less than a handful of fanfics out there that do any of these ideas justice. Some of them are just so cringeworthy that it makes one wonder if the author was on something while writing it. The Kyubi is a construct made of chakra that takes the form of a fox, and has, over time, become a being of malevolence and hatred. He isn't Naruto's friend, period. Even in the series where Naruto and Kyubi do become friends, it wasn't a gradual friendship that slowly formed over time. Kyubi's hatred towards Madara overshadowed his hatred of Naruto, and so he agreed to team up with Naruto to fight against the once head of the Uchiha clan. A lot of authors never treat Kyubi as a character with depth. Most treat him as a cheap plot device to give Naruto superpowers, which is a real damn shame because Kyubi is a unique character with a lot to offer. Our last cliché for this video is Japanese vocabulary. Naruto is a Japanese manga and anime series. Its author is Japanese and is published by a Japanese company. The theme of Naruto revolves around ninja, which is a part of Japanese history and culture. Hence, a lot of authors tend to use certain words and phrases in their untranslated state in order to try and maintain the original meaning and context. Unfortunately, some authors don't use this idea properly. In fact, they outright butcher it. The Japanese language has different rules than English, and their society is also very different. Language and culture are very much intertwined with each other. Thus, a lot of authors use Japanese words and phrases without really knowing the social and historical context behind them. This issue can get even worse when the author just randomly puts Japanese words in their fanfic solely to make it appear more authentic somehow. If you're going to use foreign words and phrases in your fanfic, then do your homework first. And now we've reached the end of the lists. I hope this video gave you a better understanding of tropes and cliches in fanfiction. I will of course make videos that dive into certain tropes and cliches to a greater depth, but that's for another time. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and thank you for watching.